I watched my sister Sarah smear my $200 foundation across her face with her grubby fingers, and I smiled. She had no idea that in my first life, that exact bottle had given her a rash so severe she'd missed prom entirely. And I'd bought it again for exactly that reason. "Thanks for leaving this out, loser," she said, not even looking at me as she stood in front of my vanity. My vanity, in my room using my makeup that I'd saved for months to buy. I leaned against my doorframe, arms crossed, watching her destroy my carefully organized collection. In my previous life, this moment had ended with me in tears, showing up to prom with a blotchy, tear-stained face while Sarah looked like a magazine cover. I'd spent that entire night watching my crush dance with her, watching her win prom queen with my makeup, perfecting her already pretty face, watching her live the night that should have been mine. But that was before the truck hit me on graduation day. Before I woke up on my 16th birthday, 3 years in the past, with every painful memory intact. "Mom said you wouldn't mind sharing," Sarah continued, now attacking my eyeshadow palette, the one I'd bought with birthday money from Grandma. "Since you're not really the makeup type anyway." I wasn't in my first life. I'd been the awkward, plain sister who tried too hard and always came up short. But I'd learned something in those 3 years before my death. I wasn't ugly. I was just raised to believe I was. "Of course," I said sweetly. "Use whatever you want." She finally glanced at me suspicious. Sarah knew me as the sister who fought back, who cried, who made scenes. This calm acceptance clearly unsettled her. "Whatever," she muttered, turning back to the mirror. "At least try not to embarrass me tonight. Jake's friends are going to be there, and I don't need them seeing my weird sister." Jake. My throat tightened at the name. Jake Morrison, who had asked me to prom 2 weeks ago with a nervous smile and sweaty palms. Jake, who in my first life had inexplicably switched to Sarah the day before prom, leaving me devastated and dateless. Jake, who I now knew had been manipulated by my sister's lies and my mother's interference. In my first life, I never knew what Sarah had told him. I died believing I was simply too unworthy for someone like Jake to actually want me. But this time, I'd been careful. I'd recorded Sarah practicing her tearful speech about how I'd only said yes to Jake to hurt her, how I'd bragged about stealing her crush, how I was cruel and jealous. I'd watched her perform this Oscar-worthy lie in front of her mirror, perfecting every sob and sniffle. I had that recording saved in 3 separate locations. "I'll try my best not to embarrass you," I said, still smiling. "The thing about being reborn with your memories intact is that you see everything clearly for the first time. All those moments that seemed normal, that I'd accepted as just how our family worked, they were abuse. Systematic, calculated abuse designed to keep me small and make Sarah shine. It had started when I was 7 and Sarah was 9. That was when Mom sat me down and explained that Sarah was delicate and needed extra support. That Sarah's feelings were more fragile, her path more difficult, her needs more important. That as her little sister, my job was to help her succeed. I'd believed it. God, I'd believed it so completely. I'd given Sarah my birthday money when she wanted a new dress. I'd done her homework when she had a date. I'd lied to our teachers when she'd copied my projects and claimed them as her own. I'd watched our parents beam with pride at her achievements, my achievements, and told myself that making her happy was enough. And when she'd stolen Jake, I'd believed I deserved it. Because girls like me didn't get boys like Jake. Girls like me were lucky to be included at all. Then I died at 18, hit by a truck while running an errand for Sarah on graduation day. She'd needed a specific shade of lipstick for the ceremony, and it could only be found at a store across town. I'd taken the bus in the rain, bought the lipstick with my last $20, and stepped off the curb into traffic. I'd died clutching a lipstick for my sister's graduation. She'd worn it in every photo, looking beautiful and perfect, while my parents mourned the daughter who'd always been convenient to lose. But something went wrong, or right, with death. Instead of moving on to whatever comes next, I woke up in my 16-year-old body with every memory intact. 3 years of life stretched ahead of me like a gift, like a weapon. I'd cried for a week, overwhelmed by the knowledge of what was coming. Then I'd gotten angry, then I'd gotten smart. "Are you just going to stand there watching me like a creep?" Sarah snapped, breaking me from my thoughts. "Sorry," I said. I was just thinking about how beautiful you're going to look tonight. That mollified her slightly. Sarah's ego was massive but fragile, requiring constant feeding. I'd spent my first life feeding it without realizing I was starving myself. I guess you're excited about going with Jake, she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp in the mirror. Even though everyone knows he only asked you because he felt sorry for you? There it was. The poison she'd drip feed me daily, hourly, constantly. Little cuts designed to make me bleed without leaving obvious wounds. In my first life, I would have believed her. I would have felt my excitement curdle into shame, would have started doubting Jake's interest, would have made myself smaller and smaller until I was easy to discard. Maybe, I said mildly, but he still asked me. Sarah's hand stilled on my blush brush. She turned to look at me directly, her eyes narrowing. You're acting weird, she said. Am I? Yeah, you're being all... She waved her hand vaguely. Calm. It's creepy. I shrugged. I'm just trying not to stress. It's prom, right? It should be fun. She studied me for another moment, then turned back to the mirror with a forced laugh. Well, don't get too excited. It's not like you're going to win prom queen or anything. That's basically already decided. She meant herself, of course. Sarah had been campaigning for prom queen since freshman year, building her popularity with calculated precision. She'd dated the right boys, joined the right clubs, befriended the right girls. She'd built herself a throne and fully expected to sit on it. In my first life, she had. She'd won by a landslide while I'd spent the night hiding in the bathroom, crying over Jake dancing with her. I'm sure you'll look beautiful up there, I said. Something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe, or suspicion. But then Mom's voice called from downstairs, sharp and demanding. Sarah, your hair appointment is in 15 minutes. Sarah grabbed a handful of my makeup, shoving it into her clutch without asking. More products I'd saved for, now gone. In my first life, I'd found out later she'd thrown most of it away after prom, declaring it cheap drugstore trash compared to what her friends used. Stay out of my room while I'm gone, she said, which was rich considering she was in my room. And don't touch my stuff. She swept out like a queen, leaving my vanity destroyed and my makeup collection decimated. I listened to her stomp down the stairs, heard Mom coo over how beautiful she looked, heard the front door slam. Then I went to my closet and pulled out my real prom dress. The dress Sarah had found and claimed was a pretty pink thing from Macy's, the kind of dress she'd look good in, but not great. The dress I'd hidden in the back of my closet, wrapped in an old garment bag, was something else entirely. I'd bought it 2 months ago using money I'd saved from a job Sarah didn't know I had. In my first life, I'd worked at a coffee shop senior year to save for college. This time, I'd started at 16, lying about my schedule and stashing every paycheck in a bank account my parents didn't know existed. The dress was midnight blue, almost black, with delicate silver embroidery that caught the light. It had cost me $800, more than I'd ever spent on anything in either life. It was sophisticated, elegant, and absolutely perfect for my coloring. But more importantly, it was the kind of dress that required no makeup. The kind of dress that would make bare skin look luminous instead of plain, that would turn simplicity into elegance. Because that was the thing Sarah didn't understand in her desperation to look perfect. Sometimes less is more. I'd spent months preparing for tonight in other ways, too. I'd started a skincare routine that actually worked, invested in products that made my skin glow. I'd learned to shape my eyebrows, to use highlighter in strategic places, to make my natural features shine. I'd learned, essentially, to be beautiful without armor, and I'd learned something else. I'd always been beautiful. My family had just convinced me I wasn't. My phone buzzed. Jake. Still picking you up at 6? I smiled at the screen. Jake, who in this timeline I'd actually gotten to know. Jake, who made me laugh and didn't make me feel small. Jake, who had asked me to prom with genuine nervousness because he actually liked me and wasn't being manipulated into it. Can't wait, I typed back. Your sister tried to talk to me again today, he responded. Told me some story about you being mean to her. IDK, it was weird. She seemed really intense. My smile widened. She's probably just stressed about prom. Don't worry about it. Okay, see you soon. In my first life, that conversation would have ended with Jake canceling on me. Sarah would have cornered him, crying and beautiful, spinning her tale of sisterly betrayal, and I would have believed I deserved it. But this time, I'd gotten to Jake first, not with lies, but with truth, and with evidence. 2 weeks ago, I'd sat with him in his car after school and played him the recording of Sarah practicing her lies. I'd shown him the texts where she'd coordinated with Mom about the best way to break us up. I'd laid out the whole systematic campaign of manipulation that was about to target him. Why? He'd asked, looking horrified. Why would they do this? Because in my family, I'm not allowed to have anything good, I'd said simply. Not things, not achievements, not relationships. Everything I have is either taken or destroyed. I'm just the supporting character in Sarah's story. He'd been quiet for a long time, then asked, "What do you want me to do?" "Just know the truth," I'd said. "When she comes to you with tears and stories, you'll know what's real." And when Sarah had approached him yesterday with her rehearsed performance, he'd simply said, "I don't believe you," and walked away. I could only imagine her rage. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. "This is Amanda Chen from the Scholarship Committee. We're pleased to inform you that you've been selected as one of our finalists for the Morrison Family Academic Excellence Scholarship. Final interviews will be held next week." My hands shook as I read the message. The Morrison Scholarship, $50,000 toward college, awarded to one student from our district based on academics, community service, and personal essay. In my first life, Sarah had won it. Or rather, I'd won it for her. She'd copied my essay. I'd known it at the time but said nothing, because that's what I did. I made myself smaller so Sarah could be bigger. The scholarship committee had been so impressed with her work that they'd awarded her the full amount. She'd gone to a prestigious university on my words, while I'd gone to community college on loans. This time I'd submitted my own essay, and I'd made sure to submit it from my own email, with my own account, with timestamps that proved authenticity. I'd also happened to mention to the committee that they might want to implement a plagiarism checker for future applications. Just a helpful suggestion. "Congratulations," I texted back. "Thank you so much for this opportunity." I was smiling as I started getting ready, taking my time with my shower, my hair, my careful skincare routine. The house was empty. Mom and Sarah at the salon, Dad at his weekly poker game where he'd stay until late, pretending our family problems didn't exist if he just avoided home enough. By the time I heard Jake's car pull up at 6, I was ready. Hair in a simple but elegant updo, dress fitting perfectly, skin glowing. No makeup except the barest touch of highlighter and a subtle lip balm. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked like me. Not the diminished, apologetic version of me I'd been trained to be, but the actual person I was supposed to be all along. The doorbell rang. I grabbed my clutch, containing my phone, the recordings, some cash, and my driver's license, and headed downstairs. Jake stood on the porch in a perfectly fitted tux, holding a corsage. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Wow," he said. "Emma, you look different without makeup," I offered. "Beautiful," he corrected. "You look beautiful. I mean, you always do, but this is... wow." I felt myself blush and accepted the corsage, letting him slip it onto my wrist. His hands were shaking slightly, and something warm bloomed in my chest. This was real. This moment, this feeling, this boy who actually saw me, it was real. "You clean up pretty nice yourself," I said, adjusting his bow tie. He grinned. "I tried. Ready to go?" "More than ready." His car was nice, not flashy, but well-maintained. Jake wasn't rich like some kids at our school, but his family was comfortable. His parents were kind people who'd made their money through hard work and smart investments, and they'd raised a son who was genuinely good. In my first life, I'd barely gotten to know him before Sarah had taken him away. This time, I'd spent months getting to know him, and I'd fallen a little bit in love. "So," he said as we drove toward the venue, Are you ready for whatever your sister has planned? I laughed. You think she has something planned? Emma, she tried to convince me you were a manipulative sociopath. She's definitely got something planned. He wasn't wrong. I'd been watching Sarah carefully for weeks, noting her whispered phone calls, her secret meetings with her friends, her increasingly frantic energy. She knew something had gone wrong with her Jake plan, and she was scrambling to regain control. Let her try, I said. I'm done being scared of her. Jake reached over and squeezed my hand. Good, you shouldn't have to live like that. Like what? Like you're apologizing for existing. The words hit me hard because they were so perfectly accurate. That's exactly what I'd been doing my entire first life. Apologizing for taking up space, for needing things, for having dreams and desires of my own. We pulled up to the venue, a historic mansion that the school had rented for the night. Students were streaming in, dressed in their finest, laughing and taking pictures. I could see heads turning as we got out of the car, could hear the whispers starting. Is that Emma Patterson? She's not wearing makeup. God, she's gorgeous. What the hell? Jake offered me his arm and we walked toward the entrance like we owned it. I kept my head high, my smile easy. This was my night. I'd died and been reborn for this exact moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. Sarah was standing near the entrance with her date, Trevor Matthews, captain of the basketball team and the kind of guy who peaked in high school. She saw me and her face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, shock, rage, and finally a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Emma, she called out, her voice artificially bright. Oh my God, what happened to your makeup? She was wearing my makeup, of course, caked on in layers that looked good in photos but harsh in person. The foundation I deliberately bought in the wrong shade was already oxidizing on her skin, turning slightly orange. The eyeshadow she'd practically bathed in was starting to crease. And unless I was very much mistaken, she was already starting to itch. I decided to go natural, I said, matching her fake sweetness. You know how it is, sometimes less is more. But you look so... She struggled for a word that could be both insult and compliment. Plain. I think she looks perfect, Jake said firmly, his arm tightening around my waist. Sarah's eyes flickered to him with barely concealed fury. Trevor, oblivious, was checking his phone. Well, Sarah said, at least you made it. I was worried after our conversation earlier that you might not want to come. Several people had stopped to listen now, sensing drama. This was Sarah's move, create a public scene where she looked like the victim and I looked like the villain. What conversation? I asked innocently. When you got so upset about me borrowing your makeup. I understand that you're insecure about sharing things with me, but I thought we'd moved past that. Beautiful, a perfect little jab that painted me as petty and jealous while making her look generous for even mentioning it. In my first life, I would have stammered an apology, would have made it worse by trying to explain. I would have handed her the victory without a fight. I wasn't upset, I said calmly. I told you to use whatever you wanted. She blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Oh, she said, recovering quickly. Well, I'm glad. I know how hard it must be for you, seeing me with all this attention. But I promise I'm not trying to outshine you. It's just natural, I guess. There were a few laughs from her friends. Trevor finally looked up from his phone long enough to smirk. Jake's jaw tightened, but I squeezed his hand. Not yet. You could never outshine me, Sarah, I said sweetly. You can only borrow my light. Her eyes widened. Someone gasped. Even Trevor looked up confused. What's that supposed to mean? Sarah demanded. Nothing, I said, smiling. Just that you look beautiful tonight. That foundation really suits you. I watched her hand go to her face, watched her start to scratch subtly. The itch was beginning. Come on, I said to Jake. Let's go inside. We left her standing there, looking confused and angry. As we walked away, I heard one of her friends whisper, Did she just insult Sarah? And another respond, I think she did, but I'm not sure how. The ballroom was decorated in silver and blue with fairy lights creating a magical atmosphere. A DJ was set up in the corner, already playing music while people mingled and took photos. It was beautiful, exactly like I remembered from my first life. But this time, I wasn't hiding in corners. I wasn't making myself small. I was standing tall with a boy who actually wanted to be with me, wearing a dress that made me feel like royalty. "You want to dance?" Jake asked. "Always." We moved to the dance floor, and I let myself get lost in the music, in the feeling of his arms around me, in the simple joy of being wanted. Other couples joined us, and I saw people staring, saw the confusion in their eyes. Emma Patterson, the weird, quiet sister, looked like this, acted like this. How had they never noticed? "Your sister keeps staring at you," Jake murmured in my ear. I glanced over. Sarah was scratching her face more obviously now, trying to be subtle but failing. The foundation was making it worse. It always did for people with her skin type. That's why I'd bought that specific brand, remembered from my first life when she'd had the same reaction. By the end of the night in my first life, she'd had a rash so severe she'd had to go to the emergency room. I'd felt terrible about it then, blamed myself for leaving the makeup where she could find it. This time, I'd left it there deliberately. "She'll be fine," I said. An hour into the dance, Sarah's face was red and blotchy. She kept going to the bathroom, presumably to check the damage. Her friends were starting to whisper, pointing at her face with barely concealed delight. High school hierarchy was brutal. The moment a queen showed weakness, the vultures circled. Trevor had abandoned her to hang with his basketball buddies, leaving her increasingly alone and desperate. That's when she made her move. The DJ called for everyone's attention. "We're going to take a short break from dancing for some special announcements and awards." I felt Jake tense beside me. "Here we go," he muttered. The principal took the microphone, smiling at the crowd. "First, I'd like to announce this year's prom court." Names were called: the popular kids, the athletes, the student council presidents. Sarah's name was called for the court, and she made her way to the stage despite her increasingly obvious rash. She was scratching openly now, her perfect makeup job destroyed. "And now the moment you've all been waiting for," the principal continued, "this year's prom king and queen." I knew what was coming. In my first life, she'd won by a landslide. Sarah Patterson, beautiful and perfect, crowned in glory while I'd watched from the bathroom where I was hiding. "Your prom king is Jake Morrison." The crowd erupted. Jake looked genuinely shocked. "And your prom queen is—" Sarah's hand went to her chest, ready to accept her crown. Her friends were already cheering. "Emma Patterson!" The silence was deafening. I felt Jake's hand squeeze mine, felt the weight of 100 eyes turning to me, felt Sarah's shock and rage like a physical force. "What?" Sarah's voice cut through the silence, sharp and disbelieving. "That's not— There must be a mistake." The principal looked uncomfortable. "There's no mistake, Sarah. The votes were counted carefully." I walked to the stage, feeling like I was floating. In my first life, this had been Sarah's moment. But this time, I'd done something she'd never considered possible. I'd been myself. I'd been kind to people she'd dismissed. I'd helped people she'd used. I'd shown up authentically while she'd built a persona based on manipulation and control, and people had noticed. As they placed the crown on my head, I looked out at the crowd and saw it. The shift. Sarah wasn't the untouchable queen anymore. She was just a girl with a rash on her face and desperation in her eyes. Jake joined me on stage, and we were supposed to dance together as king and queen. But before we could, Sarah grabbed the microphone from the principal. "This is ridiculous!" she shouted, her voice cracking. "Everyone knows Emma doesn't deserve this. She's nothing. She's nobody. I'm the one who should be queen." The crowd stirred uncomfortably. This was not how prom queens behaved. "Sarah," the principal said, reaching for the microphone. "Please." "No." She jerked away from him, her face now fully broken out in angry red welts. "You all need to know the truth about Emma. She's manipulative and cruel. She stole my crush." She pointed it at Jake. "She's been plotting against me for months. That's enough, Sarah," I said quietly, but my voice carried through the microphone Jake had handed me. She whirled on me, eyes wild. "You did this. You planned this. I didn't plan anything," I said calmly. "I just stopped letting you control me. You're such a—" "Sarah, stop!" This voice came from the crowd. My head snapped toward it. Mom stood at the edge of the dance floor, looking between us with an expression I couldn't read. Mom, Sarah called out desperately. Tell them how Emma has always been jealous of me, how she's always tried to ruin everything for me. But Mom was staring at Sarah's face, at her wild eyes and desperate energy, and I saw something shift in her expression. In my first life, Mom had always backed Sarah unconditionally, but watching her now, seeing her oldest daughter melting down publicly, something seemed to be cracking. Sarah, honey, Mom said carefully, your face, we need to get you to a doctor. I don't need a doctor. I need everyone to see that Emma is scared, I finished for her. Desperate, losing control. She stared at me, and in that moment, I saw it. The recognition. She saw that I knew. Somehow, impossibly, she saw that I knew everything. How? She whispered. I smiled sadly. Does it matter? The DJ, sensing that things were spiraling, started the music back up. People turned away from us, embarrassed and uncomfortable. Sarah stood there, still holding the microphone. But no one was listening anymore. Mom climbed onto the stage and gently took the microphone from Sarah's hand. Come on, sweetie. Let's go to the ER and get you checked out. But now, Sarah? They left together, Sarah shooting me a look of pure hatred as she went. I watched them go, feeling oddly empty. This was my victory, but it felt hollow. Then Jake pulled me into his arms for our dance, and suddenly it didn't feel hollow anymore. You okay? He asked as we swayed to the music. Yeah, I said. Actually, I think I am. We danced, and people congratulated us, and for the first time in either of my lives, I felt like I belonged. Not because I'd made myself small enough to fit, but because I'd finally allowed myself to take up space. The rest of prom was beautiful. Jake and I danced until our feet hurt, took silly photos with friends I'd actually made this time around, laughed until my face hurt. This was what I'd been missing in my first life. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy. We left around midnight, Jake insisting on taking the long way home. We drove through the quiet streets, windows down, music playing softly. Can I ask you something? Jake said eventually. Sure. What did your sister mean when she asked how? What did she think you knew? I was quiet for a long moment, debating how to answer. She saw that I'd changed, I said finally. That I wasn't playing my assigned role anymore. It scared her. What was your assigned role? To be less than her. To make her look better by comparison. To sacrifice everything so she could shine. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's abusive, I finished. Yeah, I know that now. He pulled over at a scenic overlook, parking the car and turning to face me. Emma, can I ask you something else? Of course. How did you do it? How did you just decide to stop letting them control you? I looked out at the city lights below us, thinking about my answer. I couldn't tell him the truth. That I'd died and been reborn with the knowledge of how my life would play out. That I'd been given a second chance to rewrite my story. I just realized one day that I deserved better, I said. Which was true enough. That I didn't have to accept the role they'd given me. That I could choose to be myself, even if it meant they didn't like me anymore. And you're not scared? Of what they'll do? I smiled. Terrified. But I'm more scared of going back to who I was. He leaned over and kissed me, soft and sweet. For what it's worth, I think who you are now is pretty amazing. We stayed there for a while, talking about everything and nothing, about his plans for college, my hopes for the future, the lives we wanted to build. It was the kind of conversation I'd never had in my first life because I'd been too busy living for other people to think about what I actually wanted. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Jake finally drove me home. The house was dark, Mom and Sarah still at the hospital, Dad probably passed out from his poker game. Thank you, I said as we stood on my porch. For tonight. For everything. Thank you for giving me a chance, he said. and for trusting me with the truth about your family. You made it easy to trust you. He kissed me again, longer this time, and I felt something settle in my chest. This was real. This was mine. No one could take it from me this time because I wasn't letting them. I watched him drive away, then let myself into the quiet house. I was exhausted, but exhilarated. My crown still on my head, my dress still perfect. I felt like Cinderella after the ball, except this time, the magic wasn't going to wear off at midnight, because this time the magic was real. I made it to my room and carefully hung up my dress, removing my crown and setting it on my vanity. My destroyed makeup collection stared back at me, but I didn't care. I had what I needed now, confidence in my own skin. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but this isn't over. You're going to pay for what you did to me tonight. Sarah. Of course. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it. She could threaten all she wanted. The difference now was that I wasn't afraid. I fell asleep with my crown on my nightstand, the moonlight making it sparkle. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I slept peacefully. The aftermath started the next morning. I woke up to my phone exploding with messages. The prom photos had been posted to social media overnight, and apparently my transformation had become a thing. People who'd never noticed me before were suddenly commenting, sharing, asking questions. Emma Patterson is stunning. How did we not see this before? That dress, though, Sarah's face, what happened? That last comment had dozens of replies, people speculating about everything from allergies to a bad reaction to stress. No one had figured out the makeup thing yet, but they would eventually. I was scrolling through the comments when my door burst open. Sarah stood there, her face still red and swollen, now with prescription cream visible on the worst patches. You, she hissed. You did this to me. I set down my phone calmly, but did what? The makeup. You knew it would make me break out. You left it there on purpose. You took my makeup without asking, I pointed out. How is that my fault? Because you... She stopped, realizing she had no actual argument. She'd stolen my property and used it. Anything that happened after was technically on her. Get out of my room, I said quietly. You're going to regret this, she snarled. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what a manipulative bitch you are. Go ahead. Try. She looked taken aback by my calm response. In our old dynamic, I would be crying by now, apologizing, trying to make peace. I mean it, she said. I'll destroy you. Sarah. I stood up, meeting her eyes directly. You can't destroy me. You never could. You could only make me think I deserve to be destroyed. And I don't believe that anymore. She stared at me, something like fear flickering across her face. Then she turned and stormed out, slamming my door hard enough to rattle the frame. I heard her stomping down the stairs, heard her shouting at Mom about me, heard Mom's tired attempts to calm her down. Part of me felt bad. Sarah was suffering, and I'd deliberately caused it. But a larger part of me remembered the girl who'd died holding lipstick for her sister's graduation, who'd sacrificed everything and received nothing, who'd believed she deserved her own misery. I'd chosen to save myself this time. If that made me a villain in Sarah's story, I could live with that. The next few weeks were a masterclass in consequences. The scholarship committee invited me for my final interview. I went prepared with my portfolio, my essay, and my transcript, all legitimately mine, with no borrowed work or stolen credit. I spoke confidently about my goals, my experiences, my vision for the future. 2 days later, I got the acceptance call. The Morrison Family Academic Excellence Scholarship was mine. $50,000 toward the college of my choice. When Mom told Sarah at dinner, my sister turned to stare at me with absolute hatred. That was supposed to be mine, she said flatly. No, I corrected. Last time it was supposed to be mine and you took it. This time I kept what was mine. Mom looked between us, confused. Last time? Emma, what are you talking about? I'd said too much, caught up in the satisfaction of the moment. Nothing. I just mean that I earned this fairly. Sarah pushed back from the table. I can't be in the same room as her right now. She left and Mom turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Emma, did something happen between you two? Besides prom, I mean. A lifetime of things, Mom. That's not an answer. I met her eyes, directly. You want an answer? Okay, Sarah has been stealing from me, copying my work, taking credit for my achievements, and sabotaging my relationships for years. And you've let her because it was easier than dealing with her tantrums. You chose her over me every single time, and I'm done pretending that's normal. Mom's face went pale. That's not... I never chose... Yes, you did. Every time you told me to give her my birthday money, to do her homework, to let her have things that were mine, you chose. Every time you called her delicate and me strong enough to handle it, you chose. Every time you looked away when she hurt me, you chose. Emma, I'm not angry, Mom, not anymore. But I'm also not going to keep playing the role you assigned me. I'm going to college on my scholarship. I'm going to build a life that's mine, and you can either accept that or not. But I'm done being small, so Sarah can feel big. I left her sitting there, stunned and silent. It felt good to finally say it out loud, to name the dynamic that had defined my entire first life. Dad came to talk to me later that night, which was surprising because Dad generally avoided conflict by pretending it didn't exist. He knocked on my door, something he'd never done before. Emma, can we talk? Sure. He sat on the edge of my bed, looking uncomfortable. Dad was a big man, athletic and imposing, but right now he looked small. Your mother told me what you said at dinner. Okay. Was it true? Have we been that unfair to you? I could have lied, could have softened it, but I'd spent one lifetime protecting everyone's feelings but my own. Yes, I said simply. He was quiet for a long time. I didn't see it, he said finally. Or I didn't want to see it. Sarah was always so much more work, always having some crisis, and you were just easy. You never complained, never asked for much. I thought that meant you were okay. I wasn't okay, Dad. I was trained to not ask for anything. By us, he said heavily. By your mother and me. Yes. Another long silence, then, I'm sorry, Emma. I can't undo the past, but I'm sorry. It was the first real apology I'd ever gotten from either of my parents. It didn't fix anything, didn't erase years of damage, but it was something. Thank you, I said. He stood up, looking older than I'd ever seen him. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. That scholarship, prom queen, all of it. You did that yourself. After he left, I cried. Not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come when something breaks open inside you. I'd spent so long being angry, being hurt, being determined to change things. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to just see me. The weeks turned into months. Sarah barely spoke to me, which was fine. Mom tried to build bridges, taking me to lunch and asking carefully about my life, but it was awkward and forced. Dad threw himself into work, avoiding the tension he'd finally acknowledged, but I was okay. I had Jake, who made me laugh and supported my dreams. I had friends I'd actually chosen based on mutual respect rather than social climbing. I had a scholarship and college acceptance letters and a future that was entirely mine. And then came graduation. I stood in the bathroom, putting on the cap and gown, and had a moment of pure dissociation. In my first life, this day had ended with my death. I'd been running Sarah's errand, clutching her lipstick when the truck hit me. This time, I was preparing to walk across the stage as valedictorian, to give a speech I'd written myself, to accept recognition for achievements that were actually mine. You ready? Jake appeared in the doorway, already in his own cap and gown. Yeah, I said, though my hands were shaking. Just having a moment. Nervous about the speech? Something like that. He took my hands in his. You're going to be amazing. Just like you always are. We walked to the ceremony together, joining the line of graduates. I could see Sarah ahead of us, surrounded by her friends, but looking isolated somehow. Her rash had healed, but something in her had broken that night at prom. She'd lost her position at the top of the social hierarchy, and she didn't know how to exist anywhere else. Part of me felt bad for her, but only a small part. The ceremony began with all the usual pomp and circumstance. Names were called, diplomas were handed out, parents cheered. When they called Sarah's name, our parents stood and applauded, but it was subdued compared to the roar she'd expected. When they called mine, the applause was thunderous. Not because I'd manipulated anyone or built a false persona, but because I'd shown people who I actually was, and they'd responded to that authenticity. Then came the valedictorian speech. I walked to the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, my parents looking proud and confused, Sarah staring at me with something that might have been envy, or respect, or hatred, Jake giving me a thumbs up, and hundreds of other people who'd spent 4 years not really seeing me until I'd decided to be seen. Thank you, I began. 4 years ago, I started high school thinking I knew exactly who I was supposed to be. I had a role, a script, a carefully defined place in the world. The problem was that place wasn't real. It was a cage built by other people's expectations and my own fear. I could see Mom shifting uncomfortably in her seat. The person I was supposed to be was quiet and convenient. She didn't take up space. She didn't have dreams that mattered. She existed to make other people comfortable, to support other people's success, to be less so that others could be more. Sarah's face had gone red. But somewhere along the way, I decided to be someone else, to be myself. And the strangest thing happened. The world didn't end. In fact, it got better. I made real friends. I discovered what I was actually capable of. I learned that taking up space isn't selfish. It's necessary. That asking for what you need isn't greedy, it's healthy. That being yourself authentically and unapologetically isn't arrogance, it's courage. I paused, making eye contact with Sarah. To everyone here who's been playing small, who's been told their dreams don't matter, who's been made to feel like they should apologize for existing, you don't have to. You deserve to take up space. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be yourself, even if it makes other people uncomfortable. The applause started before I'd even finished, building to a roar. I stood there, letting it wash over me, feeling everything I'd been too dead to feel in my first life. This was victory. Not the petty revenge I'd imagined, but something bigger. I hadn't just beaten Sarah, I'd freed myself. After the ceremony, there were photos and congratulations and tears. Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "I heard you," in my ear. Dad told me he was proud. Sarah stayed away, leaving with her friends without saying goodbye. Jake found me in the chaos and pulled me aside. That speech was incredible. You think? I know, Emma, He paused, looking nervous. I'm going to Stanford in the fall. I know you're going to Columbia. I know it's going to be hard with the distance, but I want to try if you do. In my first life, I'd never gotten this moment. I died before I could even think about college, about relationships, about a future that was mine. I want to try too, I said. He kissed me there in front of everyone, parents and teachers and fellow graduates, and I let him. Let myself be seen being happy. Let myself be seen being wanted. The rest of graduation day passed in a blur of celebration. There was a party that night at someone's house, and for once I went and had fun without worrying about Sarah's approval or my parents' expectations. I danced and laughed and stayed out late and felt utterly, completely free. It was nearly dawn when Jake drove me home. We sat in his car in my driveway, not wanting the night to end. You know what I realized? He said. What? When we first started dating, I kept expecting you to be what your sister said you were. Manipulative, cruel, selfish. But you're none of those things. You're just yourself. And yourself is pretty great. Yourself is grammatically questionable, I teased. You know what I mean. Yeah, I do. I leaned my head on his shoulder. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for letting yourself be seen. I went inside as the sun was rising, feeling exhausted and exhilarated. My room was exactly as I'd left it, but everything felt different. I'd crossed a finish line I'd never reached in my first life, and the world beyond it was wide open with possibility. I changed out of my graduation clothes and lay down on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in this house, Sarah was probably awake too, dealing with the ruins of the life she'd thought was guaranteed. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for destroying her carefully constructed world, but I didn't, because I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd just stopped building it for her. My phone buzzed. A message from Columbia University. Welcome to the class of 2029. Your orientation information is attached. I stared at the message, feeling emotion well up in my throat. In my first life, I'd gone to community college on loans, working full-time to pay for classes, while Sarah had gone to her dream school on my scholarship. I died never having lived in a dorm, never having experienced a real college life, never having pursued my actual dreams. This time, I was going to Columbia on a full scholarship I'd earned myself. I was going to study literature and maybe minor in creative writing. I was going to live in New York City and discover who I was without my family's expectations weighing me down. I was going to live. The summer passed quickly. I worked at the coffee shop, saved money for college expenses, spent time with Jake before we both left for school. Sarah and I coexisted in the house like strangers, which was better than the alternative. Mom tried to plan family dinners and activities, attempting to force some kind of reconciliation, but it was hollow. You can't fix years of systemic abuse with a few awkward meals. Some things are just broken. But I was okay with broken. Broken things could be left behind. Jake and I said goodbye at the airport, him flying to California, me to New York. We cried and promised to call every day and swore that distance wouldn't matter. I love you, he said, and it was the first time either of us had said it. I love you too, I replied, meaning it completely. Then I was on a plane, flying toward a future that was entirely mine. No script, no assigned role, no one to make small so others could feel big. Just me, finally taking up all the space I deserved. Columbia was everything I'd dreamed and nothing like I'd expected. My roommate was a girl from Texas named Maria who talked constantly and had strong opinions about everything. My classes were challenging and exciting. The city was overwhelming and beautiful and alive. I called home once a week because Mom asked me to. The conversations were brief and awkward. Sarah had gone to a local state school, without a scholarship, without special recognition, without anything handed to her. I heard through Mom that she was struggling, academically and socially, that she'd expected college to be like high school where she could manipulate her way to the top. I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Jake and I video called every night. The distance was hard, but the relationship was solid. We were building something real, something based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than manipulation and control. Months passed. I thrived at Columbia, making friends and getting good grades and discovering parts of myself I'd never known existed. I joined clubs, went to parties, stayed up late having the kind of deep conversations that only happen in college dorms at 3 a.m. I was happy. Genuinely, completely happy. It was November when I got the call that changed everything. Emma? Mom's voice was strange, tight with an emotion I couldn't identify. You need to come home. There's been an accident. My stomach dropped. What kind of accident? Is everyone okay? It's Sarah. She tried to... Mom's voice broke. Can you just come home? Please. I was on a plane that night, my mind racing with possibilities. What had Sarah done? Was she hurt? Was this my fault for taking away her coping mechanisms, her sense of identity? I got home to find the house dark and quiet. Mom met me at the door, looking 10 years older than when I'd left. What happened? I asked. She overdosed, Mom said flatly. Pills, she's alive, but they said it was deliberate. The world tilted. Sarah had tried to kill herself. Is she in the hospital? Yes, the psychiatric unit. They're keeping her for evaluation. Mom's eyes were red from crying. Emma, she left a note. It mentioned you. What did it say? That she couldn't live in a world where you'd beaten her. That everything she'd built had crumbled and it was your fault. That she wished she'd never had a sister. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Mom, I know, Mom interrupted. I know it's not actually your fault. The therapist explained it to me. They're saying she has narcissistic personality disorder, that she's been building a false self her entire life, and when that false self was challenged, she couldn't cope. I sat down heavily on the couch. I didn't mean for this to happen. I know, but Emma, Mom sat beside me. I need you to understand something. What happened to Sarah is not your fault, but what we did to you, how we raised you both, that is our fault. We created a monster in Sarah by teaching her she deserved everything. And we created a victim in you by teaching you to deserve nothing. Both of those things were abuse, do you understand? I nodded, unable to speak. I'm so sorry, Mom said, and this time the apology felt real. I'm so sorry for all of it, for every time I chose her over you, for every time I told you to be smaller so she could be bigger, for everything. We sat there together, crying. Not the tears that fix things, but the tears that acknowledge what's been broken. I visited Sarah in the hospital the next day. She looked small in the bed, her hair lank, her face pale. When she saw me, her expression twisted with something complicated. You came, she said. Of course I came. You're my sister. Am I? Because it feels like I don't know who you are anymore. You're not the Emma I knew. No, I agreed, I'm not. The Emma you knew was a person you created to make yourself feel better. I'm the real Emma, the one who deserves to exist. Kate looked away, saw. They're saying I have a personality disorder, that I need years of therapy, that I've been abusive to you. Yes, I said simply, I didn't mean to be. I know, but that doesn't change what happened. We sat in silence for a while, then Sarah said quietly, I hate you. I know. But I also envy you. You're free. You're actually yourself. And I don't even know who I am without the person I pretended to be. Then maybe it's time to figure that out. She looked at me then, really looked at me. How did you do it? How did you just break free? I thought about my answer carefully. About the death I couldn't mention, the rebirth I couldn't explain, the second chance that had changed everything. I realized I had a choice, I said finally. Between living for myself or dying for everyone else, I chose myself. And you don't feel guilty? Sometimes. But not enough to go back to who I was. Sarah nodded slowly. Maybe that's what I need to learn. How to choose myself without destroying everyone else in the process. Maybe, I agreed. I left the hospital feeling drained but oddly at peace. Sarah had a long road ahead of her, therapy, medication, rebuilding her entire sense of self. She might never fully heal from what our parents had done to her, what she'd done to herself, but that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I flew back to Colombia the next day, back to my classes and my friends and my life. Jake called that night and I told him everything. Are you okay? He asked. Yeah, I said and meant it. I am. Do you think your sister will be okay? Eventually, maybe. I hope so. But you're not going to sacrifice yourself to save her. No, I'm done with that. Good, he said firmly, because I love the you that exists now, the one who takes up space and dreams big and doesn't apologize for being herself. I love that me too, I said. And I did. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I loved myself. Not the version of me that made other people comfortable, but the actual me, flawed and real and unapologetically present. The semester ended. I aced my finals, made the dean's list, got invited to join the honors program. I went home for winter break to find mom in therapy and dad actually present. Sarah was still in treatment, making slow progress. We had a family session with Sarah's therapist. It was brutal and honest and painful. Sarah admitted things she'd done, and I admitted how much they'd hurt. Mom and dad owned their role in creating the dynamic. Everyone cried. Nothing was fixed, but things were acknowledged, and that was a start. I want to try to have a real relationship with you, Sarah said at the end of the session. Not the twisted thing we had before, something actual and honest. Okay, I said carefully, but that means you have to see me as a person, not a supporting character in your story. I know, I'm trying. Then we can try too. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was messy and complicated and uncertain, but it was real. I spent winter break working at the coffee shop, seeing Jake, who was home from Stanford, and slowly, carefully rebuilding something with my family. Not the toxic dynamic from before, but something new. On New Year's Eve, Jake and I went to a party together. At midnight, as fireworks exploded over the city, he kissed me and said, "To the best year ever." To the best year, I agreed. But I was thinking about something else. In my first life, I died at 18, just months after graduation. I'd lived that entire life as someone else's supporting character, and I died running someone else's errand. This life, I'd made it past 18. I'd gotten to go to college. I'd gotten to fall in love. I'd gotten to be myself. Every day now was borrowed time, a gift, a second chance I'd been impossibly given. And I wasn't going to waste a single moment of it. Spring semester started, and I threw myself into my classes and my life. I dated Jake long distance and made it work. I joined the college literary magazine and got my first piece published. I applied for summer internships and actually got one. At a publishing house in Manhattan, my life was mine. My achievements were mine. My happiness was mine. I called home once a week. Sarah was out of treatment now, living at home and taking classes at community college. She'd started therapy 3 times a week and was working on herself. We talked sometimes, awkward, careful conversations where we both tried to be honest. "I'm reading your essay," she said one day. "The one you wrote for the scholarship." My stomach clenched. "And?" "It's good, really good. I can see why you won." A pause. "In my first application, I copied it. Did you know that?" "Yes," I said quietly, "and I thought so. That's why they made me rewrite it this year, isn't it?" "Someone flagged it as plagiarism." "Probably." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. For that and for everything else." "Thank you." "Are we ever going to be okay? Like, actually okay?" I thought about it honestly. I don't know, maybe. If we both keep working at it. I want to try. Then we'll try. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was something. The year passed in a blur of classes and experiences and growth. I spent the summer in New York, interning and living in a tiny apartment with Maria. I learned about publishing and editing and the business of books. I discovered I was good at it. Jake came to visit for a week in July. We walked through Central Park and saw Broadway shows and ate too much pizza. We talked about the future, about graduate school and careers and what we wanted from life. "I think I want to be a writer," I told him one night as we sat on the Brooklyn Bridge watching the sunset. "You should," he said. "You're good at it." "How do you know? You've only read like 2 things I've written." "Because you're good at everything when you're actually yourself." I leaned against him, feeling content. "What about you? What do you want?" I'm thinking law school, but the kind where I help people, not corporations. That fits you. Yeah? Yeah. We sat there as the sky turned pink and orange and purple, and I thought about how in my first life I'd never gotten this. The simple joy of being with someone who saw me, who supported me, who loved the actual me instead of some diminished version. I thought about the girl who died at 18, and I silently thanked her for giving me this second chance, for letting me live the life she never got to have. Sophomore year started, and I was more confident, more settled. I'd declared my major, English with a creative writing concentration. I'd gotten a job at the campus writing center. I'd moved into an apartment off campus with Maria and two other friends. I was building a life that was completely mine. The call from the scholarship committee came in October. Ms. Patterson, this is Dr. Morrison from the scholarship committee. My heart jumped. Yes? I wanted to inform you that we've selected you as this year's scholarship ambassador. You'll be speaking at our annual gala and helping with recruitment for next year's candidates. Really? Your story is exactly what we look for, someone who overcame significant obstacles through their own merit and determination. We'd be honored to have you represent the program. I said yes, of course. And when the gala came in November, I stood on stage in front of hundreds of people and told my story. Not the real story. I couldn't explain about rebirth and second chances, but the important parts about learning to value myself, about refusing to be small, about the courage it takes to be yourself. My parents came to the gala. So did Sarah, looking nervous in a borrowed dress. After my speech, Sarah found me. That was good, she said awkwardly. Really good. Thanks. I'm proud of you. I know I don't have the right to say that, but I am. I looked at her, really looked at her. She'd changed in the past year, lost some of the brittle desperation, gained some genuine humility. She was still working on herself, still struggling, but she was trying. Thank you, I said. That means something. I know I can never make up for what I did, but I want you to know I'm trying to be better. I know, and that matters too. We hugged, and it felt different than any hug we'd shared before. Not comfortable exactly, but real. The rest of my college years passed in a similar pattern: growth, achievement, building a life that was authentically mine. I got straight A's, won writing awards, published stories in literary magazines. Jake and I stayed together through the distance, visiting each other as often as we could. Sarah and I slowly built something that resembled a real relationship. We talked on the phone sometimes, met for coffee when I was home. She told me about her therapy, her progress, her setbacks. I listened and tried to be supportive without sacrificing myself. Mom and Dad continued their own therapy and work. They couldn't undo the past, but they were trying to understand it and do better. It was all any of us could do. Senior year, I applied to graduate programs in creative writing. Jake applied to law schools. We made plans to end up in the same city if possible, but we were both committed to following our own paths first. We'll figure it out, he said, because we're worth figuring out. Yeah, I agreed. We are. I got into Iowa's Writers' Workshop, one of the best MFA programs in the country. Jake got into several top law schools and chose Columbia so we could be in the same city again. At graduation, I gave another speech. This one is salutatorian. I talked about second chances and self-determination and the courage to be yourself. I didn't mention that I'd quite literally gotten a second chance at life, but the truth of it infused every word. After the ceremony, my family gathered for photos. All of us together, Mom, Dad, Sarah, and me. We looked like a normal family in those photos. No one could see the cracks and repairs, the years of work it had taken to get here, but we knew. And maybe that was enough. That night, Jake and I sat on the same porch where he'd dropped me off after prom 3 years ago. Remember that night? He asked. Of course. You wore that blue dress and looked like magic. No makeup, just yourself. I'd never seen anything like it. I was terrified, I admitted. That whole night I was terrified Sarah would win somehow, that I'd end up back where I started. But you didn't. No, I didn't. He turned to me, suddenly serious. Emma, I need to tell you something. My heart raced. Okay. I've loved you since that night. since I saw you standing on your porch in that dress, refusing to be what everyone expected. I've loved you every day since then, and I'm going to love you every day going forward. Jake, I'm not proposing, he said quickly, but not yet. We're too young, we have graduate school, there's too much life to live first. But I need you to know that this is it for me. You're it. I felt tears prick my eyes. You're it for me, too. We kissed as the stars came out, and I thought about all the things I'd gained in this second life. The education, the achievements, the relationships, the self-respect. But most of all, I'd gained this, the absolute certainty that I deserved to be loved for exactly who I was. The girl who'd died at 18 had never known that. But the woman I'd become knew it in her bones. Graduate school was challenging and rewarding. I spent 2 years in Iowa writing and learning and growing as an artist. Jake visited when he could, and I flew to New York on breaks. The distance was hard, but we made it work. I wrote a novel during my MFA, a story about a girl who learns to take up space, who refuses to be small for others, people's comfort. It wasn't about my actual experience, but the truth of it was there in every page. My thesis advisor loved it. This is publishable, she said. Actually publishable, you should send it to agents. So I did, and after months of rejections, I got an offer of representation. Then a book deal, then a publication date. My novel came out the year I turned 25. By then, I was living in New York with Jake, who'd graduated law school and gotten a job at a nonprofit. Sarah was finishing her bachelor's degree, still in therapy but making progress. Mom and Dad were retired and working on their marriage. The book release party was at a small bookstore in Manhattan. My family came, all of them. Sarah brought a copy for me to sign, and when I opened it, I saw she'd already written something on the inside cover. To Emma, who taught me that taking up space isn't selfish. Thank you for being yourself, even when it meant I had to change. Love, Sarah. I looked up at her with tears in my eyes. Sarah, it's true, she said quietly. You saved my life by living yours. I know that now. The reading went well. People asked questions about my process, my inspiration, my future projects. Jake stood in the back, beaming with pride. My parents sat in the front row, holding hands. After everyone left, Jake and I walked home through the New York streets. It was late spring, warm and alive with possibility. I'm proud of you, he said. I'm proud of me too. He laughed. Good. You should be. We walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Jake said, Emma? Yeah? Remember what I said at graduation about not proposing yet? My heart stopped. Yes. I think I'm ready now. If you are. I stopped walking, turned to face him. Jake Morrison, are you proposing? Yes. He pulled a ring from his pocket, simple and beautiful. I love you. I love who you are, who you've always been, who you're still becoming. I want to spend my life taking up space with you. Will you marry me? I looked at him, this boy who'd asked me to prom when I was 16 and scared, who'd believed in me when I was learning to believe in myself, who'd loved me through every transformation and triumph. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. He slid the ring onto my finger and we kissed there on a New York City street corner with people streaming past us. No one noticed or cared, and that felt perfect. This moment was ours, just ours, no one else's story but our own. We got married a year later in a small ceremony in Central Park. Sarah was my maid of honor, which would have been unthinkable a few years ago, but we'd both changed. Both grown into people who could actually support each other. I'm happy for you, she said as she helped me into my dress. Really, genuinely happy. Thank you, that means everything. I know I was awful to you for so long. I know I can never fully make up for it, but I want you to know I see you now, the real you, and she's incredible. I hugged her, careful not to mess up my makeup. You're pretty incredible too, the real you. I'm getting there, she said with a small smile. Slowly. The ceremony was beautiful. Jake cried when he saw me walking down the aisle. I cried during the vows. Everyone cried during the reception speeches. My father gave a toast that shocked me. I spent years not seeing my daughter Emma, not really seeing her. I saw what I expected to see, what was convenient to see. But Emma refused to stay invisible. She demanded to be seen, to be known, to be loved for who she actually was. And in doing so, she taught our whole family what it means to be authentic. Emma, I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, but I'm grateful that you didn't give up on yourself while you waited for us to catch up. To Emma, the bravest person I know. I sobbed through the entire speech. After, Dad hugged me tight and whispered, I love you, the real you, always. My mother's toast was shorter but equally meaningful. To Emma, who taught me that love isn't about making someone smaller so they fit a certain shape. Real love means giving someone space to become their biggest, truest self. I'm still learning that lesson, but I'm grateful you're patient with me. I love you, sweetheart. Even Sarah gave a toast. My sister Emma is the strongest person I know. Not because she never broke, but because she broke and then chose to heal. She could have let our family dysfunction define her, destroy her, diminish her. Instead, she defined herself. Emma, thank you for showing me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. I'm still working on it, but I have you as my example. I love you. Jake's toast was last. Emma walked into my life when we were both 16 and she changed everything. She taught me that real beauty is authenticity, that real strength is vulnerability, that real love is seeing someone completely and loving them, not despite who they are, but because of it. Emma, you are my favorite person, my biggest inspiration, my best friend. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life taking up space with you. We danced until midnight, surrounded by people who loved us, who saw us, who celebrated us being exactly who we were. That night, lying in bed next to my husband, I thought about the girl who'd died at 18. The girl who'd never gotten to go to college or fall in love or publish a book or get married. The girl who'd spent her entire life being small. Thank you, I whispered to her ghost. Thank you for giving me a second chance. I promise I'm living it right. Jake stirred beside me. Did you say something? Just thinking out loud. About what? About how grateful I am. For all of this, for you, for the life we're building. He pulled me closer. Me too. I fell asleep happy, fulfilled, complete. And in the morning, I woke up ready for whatever came next. Because I'd learned the most important lesson, I deserved to take up space, to be seen, to be loved, to be myself, completely and unapologetically. And no one, not my family, not society, not even my own doubts, could take that away from me again. I'd died once being someone else's supporting character. But I'd been reborn as the protagonist of my own story, and I was going to live that story to its fullest, brightest, most authentic end.